there anyone out there, anyone left, that thinks the Prime Minister can muster up the imagination to find some magical solution to the impossibilities of Brexit? The truth is she won't, because she can't. People like to say this is all Theresa May's fault, it's all going wrong because of her, but she's not the problem. Brexit is the problem. She has an impossible job because it's an impossible task. And that's why MPs should put this back to the voters, to see if they want to carry on wading through the Brexit quagmire or change course, have the chance to reject a bad deal, reject no deal in a people's vote. Theresa May said many times she wouldn't call a snap election. She did. She said many times there won't be a people's vote. I believe there will, and I believe there should be. That's why I'll be marching with tens of thousands on Saturday to demand a people's vote, to demand a say on any final Brexit deal. We'll be shouting it from the rooftops, and I believe MPs would be wise to listen.
Now, over 1 million people marched urging the government, of which you are a central figure, not to invade Iraq. You ignored them. Why should this government take any notice of 100,000 Remainers calling for a second referendum?
Well, for a start, even though I accept that the Iraq was a very controversial and decision which divided the country, we had a united cabinet and Parliament backed it. I think what you have here...
Your Labour Party was deeply divided on it.
The Labour Party was, and the country was divided.
Tory votes.
Yes, but...
And you ignored a million people.
We didn't ignore it. Tony Blair was the Prime Minister wanting to get re-elected. He looked out of his window and realised there were an awful lot of people against it. But ultimately, this is why I'm against referendums in general. Governments and Prime Ministers are elected to take big decisions and take the country forward. What's happened here is that a referendum... David Cameron decided to have the referendum as a tactic to try to help him win an election. He won the election, he had to give the referendum. He's plunged the country into, I think, chaos. We're coming to the potential chaos. There's an impasse, there's no unity in the cabinet, there's no unity in either of the main parties. Parliament, I don't think, will vote for anything that's currently on offer. There is no good deal now on offer. And I think the country is getting more and more concerned that Parliament is potentially going to do something that most of them actually think is bad for Britain. And that's just, I think that in itself is anti-democratic.
All right. Caroline, would a second referendum solve all of the above?
No. We had a people's vote in 2016 and then we had a general election in which both Labour and Tory went into that election respecting the outcome of 2016 and against a second referendum. And there isn't a majority in Parliament for a second referendum. And what do? Have another one and maybe have best of three? And already there is disagreement about what should be even the question if there was such a second referendum. Because, look, I respect Alastair. Alastair wants to overturn the referendum of 2016. So it really isn't about a deal, because there will never be a deal that Alastair would be prepared to sign up to.
That's not true.
Well,
that's not true.
No, I think that... Well,
I think it's unlikely. But let me...
Can I just finish what I was saying, if that's
okay?
On. Thank you. So some have argued that we should have deal, no deal or remain. Some have said deal, no deal. I don't have a sense, despite the money, the resources, the celebrities and everything else that have gone into the People's Vote campaign for the last 2 years, there is any evidence of any real change.
What would the question be?
Question of the referendum. Well, I think that, I said to you last time I was on one of your programmes, that I think it partly depends on the chaos that leads to it, and I think there will be chaos at some point. If, for example, Theresa May does get a deal, there's no good deal now that she can get. If she gets a deal and it's rejected by Parliament, then you may end up with no deal v no Brexit. I think that's not impossible. You may have...
Well, what about deal versus remain?
Deal versus remain, I think that's entirely possible. She wants no deal versus her deal. I think that would be incredible if Parliament allowed that to happen. And just to take up Caroline's point about whether the country is changing, I don't think there's any doubt that the country is changing. And I think everywhere you go, you find people absolutely united that this is a complete mess.
Oh, I don't think that's a different argument.
It may be a different argument, but how bad does it have to get before somebody like you says, actually, this may damage my constituents? Because I think it will. There's no deal available.
Well, a lot of my constituents didn't feel back in 2016 that they were reaping the huge benefits of the European Union. And actually, the leadership that needed to be shown, both in that referendum by the Remain campaign, but before that, was considerably lacking.
I agree with that.
But actually, what I hear more often, Alastair, on the doorstep and out in communities, not just in Doncaster but elsewhere, is amongst both Leave and Remain voters.
Get on with it.
Let's get on with it. But you're right about one thing.
It?
Hang on, but you're right about one thing, is that there is a feeling in the country that the handling of this hasn't been great. I think there's criticism of the government, but I also think there is criticism of those they see of trying to frustrate the referendum in 2016.
Right, Michael, what about Alastair's point that if Parliament can't agree to whatever deal is done, or there is no deal, or it votes against no deal as well, if Parliament can't make up its mind, why not put it back to the people?
Well, Alastair said that he thinks referendums are a bad idea and then argues for another one. So, I mean, sorry, I think you've made yourself sound ridiculous, because to say they're a bad idea and then say you want another one.
It was a bad idea to have one.
You need to let Michael speak.
Okay.
It's perfectly clear you want another one because you didn't like the result of the last one. And you didn't know the mind of the people in 2016. You got that wrong, and you come and pontificate to us this evening about what you think the mind of the people is today.
Because I told David Cameron he was losing it.
There's a great EU tradition here, which is that whenever people vote against the elite, they're required to vote again. And that happened in Denmark, it happened in France and Ireland, and I think the Netherlands. And we are going to be the first country that is not required to vote again. We're going to be the first country where the people actually make a decision. They made it responsibly. They heard all the arguments. Now, you asked me what happens if Parliament cannot make a decision. I think you have to have a general election. You have to try and seek a majority. The government has to go to the electorate and say, this is the deal that we wish to push through. We're still a parliamentary democracy. That is the way to do it. Alastair doesn't allow for the possibility, of course, that people might say, no, we're very intent on going ahead with leaving, because the last thing we want is an elite pushing us around. The 2016 referendum was a most unusual occasion where the British people were able to make a really important decision about their own future. And as soon as they make it in a way that people like Alastair don't like, they're told they got it wrong and they're to vote again. I think their reaction could be extremely indignant.
Does it never, picking up on Mark's point, does it never cross your mind that you risk unleashing forces here that you can't control? That next time you actually lose big time? Because people would see this as an establishment attempt to do them down. Or you win. But the price is you unleash forces into British politics, particularly from the populist right, that we've not had.
But it's partly the populist right that has delivered Brexit. It's partly the Farageist, Johnsonist right that has made this happen in the first place.
But I'm not talking about the Johnson kind of right. I'm talking about the kind of right that is strong in France and in Italy and in Germany and in Bavaria.
I don't see these guys as being that far off it.
No, that's preposterous.
I don't see Farage as being that far
That's preposterous. And by the way, in the last general election, UKIP pretty much disappeared.
Yeah,
I mean, the unusual situation we have in this country is because we have a referendum and people believe that the referendum was going to be acted upon, the people who were to the right of the Conservative Party fell away in the last general election.
But now,
84% went to the Labour Party and the Conservative Party.
Let me ask Michael the question I asked Caroline. How bad does it have to get? How bad do the negotiations have to get? How bad do the preparations have to get? How big does the hit on the economy have to be? How bad does the fall in living standards?
All of that is Project Fear, and all of that is assertion.
No, it's not Project Fear. And also,
I can't quite remember whether you're old enough, but I'm old enough to remember a time when we lived outside the European Union. And we did pretty well.
Yeah, fine. And now we've had 40 years wrapped up in it, and you're seeing how hard it is to come out of it.
Yeah, okay, it's quite hard to come out of it.
Can I answer his point about referendums as well?
But I think that's...
Because, can I answer your point earlier? You said, when I say I don't like referendums, I think they potentially get into the mess that we're now in. I think, however, there having been a referendum that delivered this, you cannot undo it just by a vote of MPs. There has to be a referendum.
All right.
And the referendum is on the deal. The government got its marching orders from the people to go and deliver this, and they are finding it impossible.
All right.
And they cannot do it without damaging the country.
So let me ask you this. If there is a second referendum and the choice is either to stay in or accept whatever deal, if a deal was done, what side would the Labour leadership campaign on?
That's a question for them, and I think one of the problems
is
it's
your party.
I think
and
one
you
of
would
the problems,
need Labour to. You would need the parties to campaign.
And the reason why
you couldn't really win without Labour campaigning for it, could you?
Almost certainly not. And the reason why I think it was so important that the People's Vote campaign helped produce a shift in policy at the Labour Party conference. And also this thing about the elite, Michael, there's going to be tens of thousands of people this weekend. Tens of thousands, including from your constituency, including from the north and
Not tens
Scotland.
of thousands from my constituency.
Won't be tens
I'm
of
sure.
thousands.
It'll be the poshest march in London since the countryside.
What there won't be is 17 million, and it's 17 million that voted for it.
Well, what side would Labour be
I'll
on
tell
in
you
a
what, though, Michael,
referendum?
there'll be plenty of people who voted Leave.
I'm not impressed by marches, and you weren't in the past either.
What side would the Labour leadership be on in a second referendum?
Well, I think it should be about accepting the result of 2016. Look, I think the point about, look, we can talk about degrees of where people are on the right, but I'm talking about the fascist right, the sort of national front of the old days, in whatever form they decide to call themselves today.
So we don't do the right thing because we're worried about the people doing the wrong thing?
No.
Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm not.
I don't think that's leadership.
Can I just? Well, I don't think it was
The right thing
leadership.
is sticking
I
with
don't
what
think
the
it was
people have
leadership
decided.
to ignore the concerns of people for 10 years before.
Depends what the consequences are.
I don't think it was leadership to ignore the concerns of people that they had in our towns and communities outside our university towns and cities, which actually, when it came to the referendum, they roared about that.
But what if I could? Brexit that's going to make their lives better?
Can I?
Just answer me that. Yes. Is there any Brexit that's going to make the lives of your constituents better?
Do you know what? I think actually, in one way, will be better. Those people may get a hearing about the things that have concerned them for a considerable amount of time.
Will any Brexit deal make their lives better?
You're fighting the referendum. We're arguing about whether there should be a referendum.
Yes.
You think Brexit will make their lives better?
I think aspects of Brexit, being able to do certain things in terms of our economy, supporting our foundation industries, having a realignment of balance in terms of our economy, and more importantly, Alastair, than anything else, I'm afraid it's sad that it took a referendum and leaving the European Union for people like yourself and others to actually start listening to those communities.
All right, he's not listening. He's intent on not
listening. He's not listening.
Okay,
You don't think the Labour government you were part of listened to those?
We're coming to the end now. No, we're coming to the end. Yep. You lost 52 to 48 last time. If you were to win 52 to 48 the second time, would you make it the best of three?
I honestly, Michael mentioned Ireland. Okay, I was in Ireland. I was with the Irish community last week, and I was doing a debate with Nigel Farage, who said to the Irish, the Europeans bullied you into having a second referendum. The Irish chose to have a second referendum, and they united around it afterwards. And I believe there are so many people now around this country who think this is a disaster, who think it's a mess.
But that's not my question.
That's what
I believe
you don't know. That's what you think.
No, but if it's
a referendum on the deal,
but if it's a narrow victory for you,
saying,
second round town, wouldn't you make it the best of three?
Yeah.
No, is the answer. I'm saying...
So you can win narrow,
no,
but his
and
side
likewise
can't
if it
win
was
narrow.
lost, and likewise if it was lost.
But what if Remain had won in the first referendum and there was a call for a second referendum
you have the
on
referendum, what is undemocratic about then having a vote on the deal, especially when it is so different to anything that was promised 2 years ago?
We're going to leave it there. Alastair Campbell, thank you. Now it's late.